Welcome back to another episode of Our Interesting Times. It is my pleasure to have F. Roger Devlin back on the show. He returns to discuss a two-part article that he wrote recently, Decadence, the Corruption of Status Hierarchies and Female Hypergamy, a response to Rob Henderson's article, All the Single Ladies. Of course, Roger Devlin is a prominent academic philosopher and the author of Sexual Utopia and Power and a frequent contributor to Countercurrents and the Occidental Quarterly. How are you doing this evening?
I'm just fine. I think this is the first time we've spoken in about 14 months. Maybe a few of your listeners will remember the last time we spoke. It was about the diplomatic maneuverings that led up to the outbreak of the Second World War in September of 1939. I guess you can find that show on somewhere in your archives.
Yes.
And today we're going to be talking about something very different.
Well, we can talk about the intrigues and maneuverings that has led to the outbreak of the war between the sexes.
Yes, exactly.
You cover a lot of this in your book, Sexual Utopia and Power, where you kind of place the focus on female behavior
Yes.
and I guess hypergamy. And your article touches on, of course, that's in the title, this
Yes.
hypergamy. And we're dealing with a problem with female hypergamy, which is sort of a natural sexual strategy for women, you could say, but combined with this ideology of equality or egalitarianism, which has created essentially a dating apocalypse, a courtship apocalypse, and also a sort of a demographic crisis as people simply aren't reproducing anymore, not getting together. So I'll let you take it from there. Is that a
Yeah.
fair summation of the problem? I don't know, is that
Well, yes,
okay? There you go.
yeah. There are people who think that the whole idea behind the sexual revolution was to cut birth rates. It does seem to have that the combined effects of feminism and the sexual revolution have reduced Western birth rates well below replacement level all across the West, and there's a lot of misunderstanding out there. Yeah, I do focus on female sexuality more than male for a couple of reasons. One, that women constitute the supply side of sex, so they are much more powerful in the mating game than men are. And the other reason is there are a lot of men out there who have no understanding of women. And some of them are, traditionalists who want to blame the whole sexual revolution on men because male sexuality is simply the only kind they understand, and they're getting it backwards. There are men out there who think that unscrupulous men must simply be forcing their attentions on poor innocent women, and that is not what is happening. If reports from the college campuses are to be trusted, it's exactly what I say in all of my writings. It's the women who end up uh, basically competing for a small number of high status males, exactly as you see in mammal packs, in baboon packs or other animal mating strategies. That the in non monogamous societies, in societies where, like hunter gatherer societies, where women are allowed to mate as they please, 60% or so of the men never become fathers. They're simply excluded. The women only want to mate at the top of the hierarchy, and so that's what they do. And the whole point of monogamy was to thwart that female tendency and to spread the sex out more evenly so that any ordinary man could become a father if he was, willing to be faithful to his wife and work hard. Now
And this
that's
this
what we need to restore if we're going to
yeah.
restore Western birth rates.
And this that imposition of monogamy, the regulation of the sexual market is what contributed to societal, I guess, prosperity and also stability. Otherwise, you have a lot of instability because you have a lot of rootless or unattached men.
That's right.
Yeah.
In Africa, which is a highly polygamous society, you get gangs of young bachelors who engage in antisocial behavior, and it's a danger in wartime. It's many anthropologists believe that monogamy began as a strategy for giving all the men, including the lower status men, a stake in the survival of the society. In a a polygamous society, the bachelors figure, why should I fight for a society that doesn't even let me get a woman or become a father? They might be inclined to go over to the other side of so that's if you can like diminish competition for mates, you get a more harmonious society, and you get a society that can face up to its enemies better, and so probably the first monogamous societies just proved stronger in warfare than their rivals, and so their rivals realized they had to imitate it. That's probably how monogamy spread.
Now, in the article, you focus initially on this article by Rob Henderson, All the Single Ladies, which laments, if you will, or just kind of focuses on the problem that higher status or educated women have in finding a man, a
Yeah,
suitable mate.
let me put this in context a little bit. I've been about the beginning of the year, I started writing on these subjects again, to repeating to some extent the things that I already said in Sexual Utopia and Power, but with newer examples. And I did a series of articles for Countercurrents. I did a pair of articles called "Hooking Up and Not Hooking Up" about the campus sex scene, and then in a response, actually it was a reader's response to one of these articles that drew my attention to Rob Henderson's article, which I had not heard about. And then, when I read it, I produced this article, which I think is the best of the series, and the most important of the series of 4 or 5 articles that I wrote on sexual matters for Countercurrents so far this year. And
Okay.
yeah, well, let's yeah, the basic thesis of Henderson's article is that educated women, meaning women with college degrees or advanced degrees, are having difficulty finding husbands, supposedly, because the world of education, of higher education, is now mostly female, and women being hypergamous, they are simply not willing to consider men who with like lower academic credentials than their own. And the result is that if they're only willing to consider men with equal or higher academic credentials, and there are fewer of those men, they end up, forming harems for these few men.
So a woman's academic success or progress, if you will, maybe credential is a better word, because I don't know if educated
Yes,
applies to these women.
that's one of
You
the
make that
main
point in the article,
points.
by the way.
One of the
Yeah.
main points of my article, yes, is that we're not really talking about education in the precise sense
They're
of
not they're not learning
shaping
Greek, right?
minds and
Yeah.
and gaining valuable learning.
Hmm.
We're talking about the academic credential ladder. Henderson describes women like with bachelor's degrees who will, what do they call it on dating sites now? Swiping right is accepting and swiping left is rejecting, or is it the other way around?
I've never done that, so yeah,
I've never done online dating myself. I think
yeah.
it's a mug's game. It's like, most of the female attention, it's hypergamy unleashed, and most of the female attention goes to like 3% of the guys.
Yeah, maybe it's a sign
So
of our age, but every
yeah,
woman that I've dated in my life, had a relationship with, and indeed the woman that I married, I first met face to face
yeah.
and had a
That's
conversation. Yeah.
That's the natural way to
Yeah.
do it. That's the natural way to do it. Well, anyway, on these dating apps, these women, if the woman has a bachelor, she will not consider a man who doesn't. And she'll even prefer to date a man with a master's degree or doctorate. And this is exactly this is applying to academic credentials, something that has already been observed in like the world of work, that women uh, will not date men who earn less than they do. And so, like these women who go into these high powered careers and start making lots of money, they will not consider any man who does not make a lot more than they do. And that shrinks the pool of men tremendously. And they're pretty much up a creek because The guys that are making the most money, they're not interested in these corporate spinsters. They're going out with young photo models, for heaven's sakes.
Mhm.
So you get a total mismatch, and it's created by feminism, and it's created by this idea that women should be ambitious in the way that men traditionally have been, to either to make lots of money or to go into the academy and earn all kinds of academic credentials. Really, men don't care about things like that. A man is going to be happier to marry a sweet-tempered waitress than he is some woman with a degree in some worthless subject like women's studies.
Yeah, even if she's doing something worthwhile or considered high demanding like medicine, she's already sort of priced herself out of the market for most men. I remember this was years ago when I was single. I think it was in my early to mid 20s. I was just out at a happy hour and I was talking to this woman who was probably 25, 26 at the time, and she was lamenting the fact she'd just I can't find guys who want to go out with me. I said, well, what's the story? And she was like, well, she was a medical doctor. I go, oh yeah.
Yeah,
I go, well, you're too intimidating for guys our age. You're not going to find
maybe.
anybody.
Yeah,
You got to
yeah,
date
yeah,
someone 10 years older. It's just not going to work.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, it just,
Exactly.
but yeah, they've, because they want to look up men. Yeah, yeah. They basically, the women prefer men that are usually taller and earn more money. That's kind of the thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Than they do.
yeah, they
Yeah.
don't want equality. Yeah, the whole premise of
Yeah.
feminism that women want equality is wrong. They want men that they can admire. And
Hmm.
how do we make men that women can admire? Well, there are only two ways. Either the men have to just keep, earning and acquiring academic credentials, staying 3 steps ahead of the women, or we got to stop urging women to enter the workplace and higher education and focus on more traditional feminine pursuits. That will lead to women respecting men more and wanting to marry them. That's
You
what I
cite
think is right.
and you cite one of the big problems is that those women who are pursuing higher education, postgraduate education, are being indoctrinated and are developing a worldview or an attitude which not only make them develop a contempt for men, contempt for male authority, um, but it makes them simply undesirable for most men, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the women who succeed in the world of work typically are in corporate life tend to be the more masculine, the less feminine women. And academic women are not, I spent too much of my life in the academy, and the women there are not exactly the kind that drive you wild with desire either. They're just, I don't know what to say. They're just not. I don't have anything against them exactly, but they're not behaving in ways that men find attractive.
Well, there's yeah, the recognition here, the acknowledgement of nature, right? How
Yeah.
the hypergamous nature of women, coupled with the ideological conviction for equality, makes them simply incompatible.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. Right. It results in this complete mismatch between men and women.
and so and again, you cite in the article how why men are driven away from pursuing higher education is because it's the type of work which they hate, whereas the type of bureaucratic drudgery that you see in academia or in a lot of bureaucracies tends to these women tend to do well at. They can pretty much pretend to work as well as men can. So,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, I actually use the example of knitting. Like that would
Yeah.
be a classic example of something of a female task. There's a reason for that. It's not just, a stereotype or a prejudice. Knitting is something that women are good at because they have a high tolerance for repetitive, monotonous work, which men do not. A man could learn to make a stitch with a couple of needles, a couple of knitting needles, more or less as well as a woman can. But by the end of the first row, he would be out of his mind with boredom and would be, throwing it down on the couch and wanting to do something else, wanting to move his limbs about. Men are restless, and women are not. So women do well at sedentary work, and it could be that doing a PhD thesis on olfactory racism in the novels of Virginia Woolf, which was a real example that I cited, uh, is like the modern equivalent of knitting. It's pointless, monotonous work that women are better at, and that's why they're earning PhDs.
Yet we have a system, a hierarchy, if you will, that's been created because the older system, older hierarchy was overthrown for various reasons. I think you alluded to the beginning of our conversation, is that actually punishes productive male-focused work and rewards bureaucratic make work. And
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know, and
Oh yeah, I mean much of the feminine workforce, they're still doing kind of women's work, like human resources. They didn't companies didn't used to have HR departments. It's a place to park the women. It's a place you can put them and put them behind a desk and make them look like they're doing something useful when for the most part they're not. Um, and yeah, and that's the way it is in the academy now. The academy is no longer something that separates the really the great intellects from the lesser ones. It really nowadays it selects for like an ability to remain in a seated posture for several years of your early adulthood, something that very few men can do. As I
but
said,
it's had to be dumbed
yeah.
down to have mass appeal, right?
Yes, it all goes back to the attempt to spread. It's a democratic ideology that people in democracies want to think that if something is good, everybody has to be able to have it. And there are some things that is just intrinsically impossible. Higher education is certainly a very valuable thing for those who are capable of it. But it used to be said not that long ago, within living memory, that an IQ of about 120 was the minimum for college education. And you try to expand it. You try to keep expanding the number of people who go to college. Uh, college The curriculum has to change. It has to. You can't fail all the students. So the process is dumbed down. A lot of what created political correctness, the black studies, the women's studies, all the various identity studies, queer studies. A lot of what's behind that is that stuff's easy. It's a lot of people who cannot do particle physics or master the subtleties of Greek grammar are perfectly able to do to learn feminist ideology and identity studies. And so yeah, that's even what has driven the politicization of higher education, just the need to present material that ordinary people can do.
Yeah, it's a question of just memorizing the jargon, and
Yeah,
then
yeah, yeah. Buzzwords. You basically, to be a feminist, you just have to learn like a short catechism. You know who to call oppressor and who to call oppressed, and that's the way it is in the other politicized departments, the various
well,
studies departments.
yeah, you quote. He was one of my favorite polemicists, Joe Sobran. He quipped, and he was very good at quips, by the way.
Yes,
He goes, "In 100 years, we've gone from teaching Latin and Greek in high schools to teaching remedial English in college."
that's right.
Yeah, and
Yeah, yeah. A lot of college students today are functionally illiterate, and they don't know how to frame an argument. They don't know how to. They can't recognize the difference between a bold assertion and an argument. They're helpless. They're like overgrown high schools or even junior high school students.
you can you say this sort of democratic approach to higher education where it can be given to everybody. This
Yeah,
assumption that because it's good has to be given to everybody, and no, obviously you cite the lowering of the IQ average for the American undergraduate. It's part of
right.
its broadening effect. At the same time, sort of I guess the introduction of sort of I would say Marxist or conflict ideology. That would be Marxism or feminism, and whether it's blacks, minority rights, racism, sexism, where women in general have been given a certain place in the so-called progressive stack, if
Yes,
you
right.
will. And of course, feminism teaches that women are oppressed the same way that Marxism teaches that the workers are oppressed, and therefore they this is going to engender an attitude in many women, and even many women are going to inculcate. Oh, sorry, they're going to internalize. Even ones that aren't conscious feminist or even conservative women will internalize some of these attitudes. One is equality, which
Yes,
again, you and I both agree, which is probably not possible, and it's probably very destructive because the sexes are not equal; they're complementary, and
right.
there's a dialectic here that has to be to achieve an objective, which is ultimately procreation and family.
Yes,
But
yes,
feminism was created to destroy that, and it militates against it because it distorts or sort of corrupts the essential relationship between men and women, which is hierarchical and but complementary.
yes.
Traditional Christianity had this idea of servant leadership for men, obedience for women in a Christian moral context, and that
Hmm.
complementary relationship makes everyone happier and also
Yes.
makes society sustainable. It flourishes. And you disrupt that, and that's what you get when you have this teaching of equality: is women no longer feel or think they need men to provide for them. But women's attract. I don't know if you agree with this. This observed. I agree with this. Is men are much more physically attracted to women than women are physically attracted to men. But
Yes.
women need men for provision and protection. We
Hmm.
now have created sort of this postmodern, post-reality economy based a lot of and debt infused economies to create the fire economy, make work jobs, law, universities, bureaucrat jobs. It's not really related to real economic activity or real, add value added extraction, agriculture, construction. These things are those things are all still dominated by men, real work, whereas fake work,
Yes, yes,
you know,
yes, yes. That
you know
women gravitate to administrative work,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
So this creates the false illusion, especially if you have an ideological conviction in the Department of Education or the Department of Labor, government contracts, which can really have a wide influence on employment because you have to meet quotas, or just the DEI agenda of discriminating against men, particularly white males.
Yeah.
Whereas the opportunity now is given to women and other oppressed
Hmm.
minorities, even though they're not a minority.
Yeah.
So now it's much more difficult to men to provide for women. Women don't
Yes.
think they need men for provision, so they're not going to be drawn to be attracted to men anymore because of this,
Right.
because they don't think they need. I don't. Men. Gloria Steinem, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle.
Right.
By the
Right.
way, she's old now and childless, so there you go.
Yeah.
But I mean that dynamic is playing out here where we have this again where here's the thing. I was listening to and see you comment on this. I was listening to an interview on YouTube. I don't know, I forget who the guy's name was, but he was talking about the dating problem, the courtship problem, and the problem with men. He was trying to be sympathetic to men and their dilemma. And he was saying how, look at all the numbers in the past few years. Women are hitting it out of the park. They're doing great in employment, in education. Uh, More single women now are buying homes than single men. And,
Yeah.
and and he goes, all this progress is great. I don't want to reverse that, but there's a
Right.
problem for women. This creates a problem with men. And I'm
Yes.
thinking to myself, I'm listening to this is to solve the problem you're addressing. Looks like you're going to have to reverse that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Every e- everything, every cloud has a silver lining, and it seems to me that men who are unable to find wives are perfectly within their rights to say, well, the women wanted equality in the workplace. Let them enjoy it to the full.
Hmm.
Let them earn their own money, pay their own bills, live their own lives, and leave us alone. We're not. If a man is supposed to support a woman, then he has a right to expect from society that society will make it possible for him to support the woman. Society has directly undermined this, has made women self to some degree self-supporting, not as much as it appears, because actually women are in dependent on tax money through the state and welfare and make work jobs, administrative jobs that don't really contribute to the economy. But still, they can earn their own paycheck in some sense and pay their own bills. It used to be. we ought to talk a little bit about the family income, which is something I did talk about a little bit in Sexual Utopia and Power. Back before the 1960s, the newspapers, the want ads in the newspapers would be in two sections. There would be women's jobs and men's jobs. Guess which paid more? The men's jobs were what were called family income jobs. Most men, at least, once they got past their teenage years or their, college part-time jobs, they would go into full-time work that was intended to enable them to support a family. And women were openly discriminated against in the workplace. They were not able to get these high-paying jobs, and as a result, uh, men were able to earn enough money that they could support a family, including a woman who stayed at home. When women all rushed into the economy in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, there was a massive influx of women into the world of work. The result was that employers only had to pay like the same for a woman and a man that they formerly had to pay in the form of a family wage to a man alone. It was, the simple economics. When you increase the supply of something, the price goes down. Women entering the workforce greatly increased the supply of labor, and so the price of labor, commonly known as wages, went down. And as a result, it's very, very difficult for a man now, for a man to have a stay-at-home wife is like an expensive luxury. You got to be rich to be able to afford that. And it shouldn't be that way. If we are to expect our young men to support their families, we should make it possible for them to support families by forcing employers to pay men a family wage once again. So no more equal pay for equal work.
Well, the same way that the sexual market has to be regulated, the labor market needs to be regulated for a sort
Yes.
of a moral or teleological purpose. There's an objective here.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
families. Yes.
families, and that's the
Yeah.
begs the question, of course, when you say women go into the workforce to compete with men for labor and wages drop. What were they doing before that? Well, they were at home.
Having children, right?
And
And
well, sorry, isn't there any economic or social or moral value to that endeavor?
most certainly. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, the idea that feminists have somehow convinced women that being a mother is too good for an intelligent woman. It's actually uh, the intelligent women that we most need reproducing and passing on their good genes to the next generation.
yeah, and you learn your mother's tongue, right? That you've referred to it as the mother's
Right?
tongue.
Yes, yes. Early education. Women can mothers educate children in a way that the state and paid servants and babysitters can never make up for. Um, the most important educator probably is in the world is the mother.
But I said there's value to that, and just because
Yes,
it isn't
economic.
denominated in dollars.
Yes, right. Yes, partly it's genuine economic value, and partly I guess it's just a value that transcends all economic considerations. It's bringing new life into the world.
Hmm. But then again, those children can then be institutionalized or warehoused somewhere and be indoctrinated,
Right.
and so there you have an agenda, if you will. Why you want to break apart, weaken the family, because the family's outside the. I guess it's harder to control. The government, state can't regulate or control it,
Right.
and with a family, you have a community and these things. So everything needs to be broken up and integrated and diversified and atomized.
Yes. Yeah.
These
Yeah.
things. But again, it speaks to some of what was occurring in the 60s and 70s. It is a remarkable coincidence at the very time that feminism is being pushed in academia, in the media, in popular culture, and you could say it's sort of emergent behavior based on uh, events coming together, the post-war economy, leisure time, the vacuum cleaner, the dishwasher, the Betty Friedan, the feminine mystique. She calls the middle class house a comfortable concentration camp.
Concentration camp.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, okay, fine. Again, we'll look at her background. Anyway, the the broader economic and macroeconomic conditions are changing. One thing is, and this kind of, I see this sort of a meta-analysis, is where you have the women are being indoctrinated into believing they can be independent, whereas none of us can be really independent. We're man is a social animal. We depend on each other. We depend on our family and all that. But the with the late 60s and the collapse of the Bretton Woods system and the severing of the tie of the dollar to gold finally, this creation of the sort of the inflationary debt-ridden economy, it's created the broad economic conditions where it's harder for a man's wage to keep up with the rate of inflation. At the same time, they're flooding the marketplace with women and telling people that it's like a moral crusade. This equality
Yes,
thing is a
yes,
moral
yes.
crusade. It's like a, and so now even women who are predisposed to stay home don't have that choice anymore because the broad economic conditions don't allow for it. At the
That's
same
right.
time, all the aspirational advertising, these things, consumerism, are creating expectations that perhaps are a bit too high. So everything is sort of militating against the family at this
Yes,
point. It's
that's right.
converging to militate against the family.
Mm.
But one point you'd make in the article is about feminism, how, and you can expand on this. Let you expand on this. How we have to look at feminism, how it says how it exploits women's dependence on men, and in a way, feminism is correct in that regard. But that's true because in the way men and women relate to one another, we need to depend on one another.
Yes, Roderick Kane makes the valuable point that women have not actually become any more independent of men than they were before feminism. What's happened is that they're dependent on men in a different way. Instead of being dependent on a husband, they're dependent on the male taxpayer, on government programs, and they're dependent on corporations coming up with make work jobs for them that cause the corporations themselves to operate much less efficiently. So yeah, all these changes have to be made to accommodate women, and women are still very much dependent on that, even though they have their own income stream. It's not a real independence. It's not an independence such as a hardworking bachelor enjoys, let's say, who earns his own bread and puts money aside. You know, the women have not become like that at all. The nature of their dependence has simply shifted. They've gone from being married to a man to being married to some kind of combination of a corporate managerial hierarchy and the government through,
Yeah, these are
tax subsidies.
people refer to these women as brides of the state, bots,
Yeah, yeah, yes, that's basically what it is.
and
Of
they
the state and of a highly bureaucratized corporations that are much like the state.
but there's it's not just a neutral thing because these women tend to have certain worldviews or attitudes which are very destructive. They're overwhelmingly liberal Democrats. They embrace abortion and sexual liberation, and which leads to
Yes,
very tortured, guilt-ridden, and unhappy lives, which makes them mentally unhealthy. I think 56% of liberal women between the ages of 18 and 40 have a diagnosed mental disorder.
they get through the day with Prozac and other kind of antidepressants. That yeah, this is not natural. Women shouldn't need pills to just function anymore, but a lot of them are behaving that way.
But they're a reliable voter base for the Democratic Party, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's the system will continue to churn these people out because they become they're the walking wounded, but the system doesn't want healthy, critically thinking, independent, with families and children,
That's
because
right.
they can vote a certain way. Kamala Harris was a great example of that. She is one of these women, yeah,
Yes. Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
her politics reflects that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we just sort of see the political angle here being
Oh, sure.
done here.
Sure.
So women either marry a man or they marry the state or corporation, right? So that's
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But obviously there's a qualitative difference between marrying a particular individual man who's going to devote his life to you, then and at the same time they pathologize that, because
Yes. Exactly.
oh
Exactly. Yeah.
you're dependent upon him. I say, well, in the sense that all of us are dependent on institutions and structures in our lives. I don't know what the,
Yes.
it's a
Sure.
false independence anyway. But you do in the article, you also you cite an example of how I think it was the after the article where you had an experience where some of these women at the university were exposed to some firemen who were
Oh yes, yes.
unambiguously masculine, and their reaction.
Yes, yes. That was that was just something, some story I read in the newspaper, I
Uh-huh.
think once. See, m- men and women both have been so denatured that when something more or less normal happens, it comes as a revelation. So anyway, this story I heard uh, involved some women working in an office, typical like office drones, working at a desk bound job, and suddenly a fire breaks out. And all of a sudden, these very, traditionally masculine guys come in fire suits and they start ordering everybody around, including the women. That's what happens when a fire breaks out. A firemen in general don't enjoy particularly high status. And the women that Henderson talks about in his article would probably never consider marrying a fireman because they think they're far too good for that. They think with their master's degrees in olfactory racism, they're too good for a fireman. But then suddenly a fire breaks out, and the firemen start shouting orders to these women, and the women naturally are scared to death, and they obey, and they rush out of the building and save their lives. And to their surprise and astonishment, in addition to having their lives saved, they find themselves practically swooning over the firemen because this is the first time in their whole miserable, lonely lives that men have put them in their place, that men have told them what to do, and they had to obey. And this was like thrilling to these women. It's something that they would never experience in real life in a major American city, except under conditions like a fire breaking out. Other than that, the only real men that women encounter would be like in a romance novel or something like that. But the women loved it. The women are programmed. They like it when they encounter a dominant man, and there are getting to be very, very few of them. So, as I said in my article, if it were possible to arrange to have like all of America's women rescued from fires by firemen, we'd probably have this, baby boom resulting from it. But, unfortunately, this was like a one-off deal, and these chicks probably went back to their worthless make work jobs pushing papers around the next day. But it was like a little glimpse of natural reality that these women got through this experience.
Well, we've talked about, what women aren't finding in men, and because of hypergamy, they just don't find most men attractive or suitable because of
That's right.
well,
Maybe I should, but before we go on, I should mention in the context of this discussion, I did recommend that people check out the Italian movie Swept Away from 1974, which it's typically referred to as misogynist movie,
mhm.
but it represents in movie form basically the same thing that happened to these office workers with the firemen. It's about a woman who is miserable because she's bossing men around, and the tables are turned on her under an unusual set of circumstances, and she finds herself having to take orders from this kind of working class man. And what happens is she discovers her feminine nature, and she is just happy as can be for the first time in her life because she's being dominated by a man, and it's about how thrilling it is and how much she enjoys it. So naturally, the feminists hate this movie to death. The movie was made by a woman. No man could have made it because men would have been too embarrassed to show women responding this way to a domineering man. Nevertheless, there's an enormous amount of truth in it, and if you want to see, the like my fireman story played out on the silver screen, just go stream this movie. make sure you avoid the remake by Madonna in 2001. That's I haven't seen it, but it's famously bad. But the original Italian movie, you can get it, I think, with subtitles. It was made in 1974, and it's an absolutely wonderful movie. It's not for the kiddies, I should warn you. It's kind of R-rated, but
Yeah.
there's an enormous amount of truth about the nature of men and women in that movie.
Well, you cite in the article by Henderson, he's asking how the ladies might find a worthy man. But how about, and you asked the article, how about the men finding worthy wives?
Right, right. Now, suppose that this woman who wrote the dissertation on olfactory racism in Virginia Woolf, suppose that she did actually consent to marry some guy who was like a policeman or a fireman or an electrician or a plumber or something like that. And the guy comes home from work after a hard day's work, and instead of having dinner on the table, she presents him with her dissertation on olfactory racism. Well, that's not going to cut it. This, the women never find out how unworthy they are of the men because they reject the men out of hand. The truth is that the women are not very good women and not very desirable as wives, but they're prevented from finding this out because they just don't manage to connect with any real man who's doing real work, who's doing important work in the world. What did I say? Where's that passage in the article? I said, these guys who are not getting masters and doctoral degrees in the academy, the reason they're not doing it is they're too busy stringing wire and fixing leaks and making sure that the world is still moving forward. They're the only thing keeping society going. Society can live without academic mandarins writing articles on racism. It can't go on without electricians and plumbers and policemen and that sort of thing. So these men that the women think are not good enough are really, in my view, they're really way too good for the women.
Yeah,
And,
sort of in an advanced economy, a lot of these things become, and also not just an advanced economy, but an economy that's really distorted. You talk about all these programs are all federally funded or foundation funded, so men are being taxed one way or another
yeah,
to pay
right.
for this
Yeah,
nonsense.
to pay so that women can get advanced degrees in racism
Yeah,
and structural oppression and stuff that is not real, that's basically just a bunch of verbiage.
yeah. Um, but again, it's we're not just this isn't just a question of taste. It's just well, obviously if women aren't providing, whether it's a suitable home, raising the children, preparing meals. This has real consequences because a large part of even America's obesity crisis can be traced back to the fact that no one knows how to prepare meals anymore.
That's right. Yes, yes.
If you look at obesity among feminists, it's very high.
Oh, yes, yes,
you
yes.
know, so
Fat.
this is real. I mean,
There's a book called "Fat is a Feminist Issue." I think
yeah. I
it's
mean,
it's it's true. Look
you're
at
gonna tell me
Andrea
there's no
Wilkins.
benefit for a woman who knows how to cook a meal?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you don't get accolades for it. You may not get a trophy. What's that bumper sticker that well-behaved woman never makes history or
Right.
something?
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, well, they're also not a nuisance either.
Right,
You know,
right.
a public nuisance.
In back in Sexual Utopia and Power, I have a few words in praise of my great grandmother who raised 13 children,
Hmm.
and in the days before electronic refrigeration. And this poor woman, her whole life was preparing food for her family. And she was, according to what I heard, she was died before I was born. But according to my mother, who knew her well, she was always cheerful. She knew that by feeding all these boys, mostly boys that she had, uh, she was contributing to the world. She was doing something important. She just knew she didn't need a testimonial or a sheepskin from an academy to tell her that. It was just obvious. She could look at her sons and see them flourishing and take pride in that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And she never felt like she wasted her life.
Right,
Yeah.
right. She knew she was important, that she was doing something very, very valuable. And that's something that women today, like the woman who wrote the dissertation on Virginia Woolf, she can't know that because it's just not possible for her to experience that. It's like, the knowledge of what you have accomplished as a mother of a large number of children, it's what has been called an experience good. It's something that's genuinely good, but you can't know it unless you've experienced it yourself. And unfortunately, these sterile academic Mandarin women, they will never experience it. They literally don't know what they're missing.
Well, they can knit sweaters for their dogs and cats, I guess. Little
Yeah,
dog.
right. Yeah, they that's a lot of guys joke that it's time to buy stock in cat food companies because that's where the future is. These women are going to just end up, having pets that they try to make substitute children out of.
So, I mean, another thing is also one thing is obviously we've created a corrupt, polluted culture. We also since the advent of hormonal birth control, where women are
Hmm.
told, I think upwards that women in, I think 85% of American women in childbearing years have used or are on birth control, hormonal
Yeah.
birth control. We do know that hormones affect behavior, and what's
Oh
anabolic
yeah.
steroids. Now, so a lot of this birth control is going to affect your mood, your behavior,
Sure.
sometimes make you go a little crazy. So 85% of women are on a drug that is changing their behavior. I've read, and from what I understand, is often women on birth control because they're hormonal. These things are manipulating your hormones, which
Yeah.
regulate your entire body. You know, and that makes them actually, when they're on birth control, attracted to weaker or beta males because they're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
conceiving. Their body, I'm not going to have a baby, so I don't need a man around, effectively. Then they go off birth control. Let's say they get married and they go off birth control because now's the time to have the kid, as modern day women think. All of a sudden, when their hormones, they recover their hormones, it gets back to a more normal hormonal pattern, and they find the man they're with unattractive.
Right. Yeah. They need an actually masculine man. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
the myth of control, but you're not really in control here. First of all, you're immortal. There's the aging process. You're subject to time. So you're not in control, and there's a time and place for everything. Now we have women 35, 40 years old, either freezing their embryos using IVF or unnatural methods because when they're in their 20s and fertile, they didn't have kids.
Right. Yeah.
Spending
A lot of
thousands, tens of thousands of dollars in the process.
a lot of men like dating adult you know get-togethers, meetups for singles now often feature these like never married men and these women who've been slutting it up with alpha males throughout their 20s, and the men are not attracted to these women, and they're right not to be. It's a complete mismatch. The women have basically ruined themselves, and the it, it,
Well,
I
psychologically, women,
yeah.
I mean,
Go ahead.
you shouldn't be a whoremonger when you're in your 20s. You're a guy, and you shouldn't be a slut when you're in your 20s if you're a woman. But it turns out psychologically, it's far more damaging for the woman because
Yes.
they find it harder to pair bond. It has something to do with the nature of the sexes, the fact that obviously paternity is only secure if the woman is monogamous.
Yes.
So if a woman is promiscuous, paternity is in question. So that what that does is men are unattracted to that. This is why men are being a slut is thought of as being low status or bad, and men aren't attracted to it. You have
Yes,
low
it's going to
yeah.
go. It doesn't matter how much women complain about slut shaming. Men are going to go right on being this way.
But
This is the way
yeah,
men
it's a
are by
double
nature.
standard. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say morally perhaps it's not a double standard, but nature there's a double standard, right? And there's a
Yeah. I
natural
mean,
reality to this.
personally, I think that the system whereby a young man and a young woman are both virgins on their wedding night cannot be improved upon. If you've only ever had sex with one person in your life, that's a pretty special person to you.
Yes, and by the way,
Yeah, that's what creates the bond.
as hard it is for people to believe. Prior to 1965, that was still the norm.
Yeah.
I know people are jaded and they're cynical. No, no, no. Even with young men, prior to 1965, that was the norm. You know,
If the women are all monogamous, the men will necessarily be monogamous as well. Yeah.
yes, women
Yeah.
control the key to sex, and men control the key to commitment.
Yeah.
See how it works?
Yeah.
How it complements? So, I know we're coming up close to an hour, and
Yeah.
I would like you. Um, what's the solution to this?
Oh, I don't. I think. I guess. I mean, the people who are behaving in these maladaptive ways, their genes are just going to be lost. The future. The future of our civilization belongs with those who are able to buck the trend. I would be optimistic that eventually there would be a sort of a return to natural, the natural family and monogamous marriage. What concerns me is that, can we do this? Can we bring back proper courtship and marriage before our civilization is destroyed by external invaders through mass immigration? That's uh, and also there are also legal changes that absolutely must be made. Uh, we cannot have women free to simply divorce their husbands, take the children, and then plunder them by means of divorce courts, the government.
Yeah, I think every year through no fault divorce, um, I think year in year out, I think it's anywhere between 2/3 and 75% of all divorces are initiated by the wife.
Yes, and sometimes when the man formally is the one who initiates the legal process, it's because the woman drives him to it.
Hmm.
Apparently, in cases that involve children, where the couple has at least one child, the woman is the one truly behind the divorce in almost 100% of the
Hmm.
cases, because they know they can keep the child, and they can continue to extract funds forcibly from the man, rather than counting on his freely assumed responsibilities to provide. So it's a terrible system. It needs to no fault needs to end, and I think mother custody needs to end. People don't know this, but actually, mother custody is not that old. It began in Great Britain in the Victorian era and
This,
spread from there
this is
throughout the
the
world.
tender years doctrine or something.
Yes, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. It began in 1839. It was called the Tender Years Doctrine, that the children need their mothers when they're very small. And originally, it only applied up to like age 7, and after 7, custody returned to the father.
I
But
think
after,
now it applies to like 25 or something. Right?
yeah, 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 it's but the system, the laws, the traditional laws within Christendom were that legal custody of the children belongs to the father. As long as the father keeps his marriage vows and provides for his family, those children are his. If his wife wants to leave him, she can do it, but she cannot take the children with her, and she loses all claim to his support. And so very few women did this. It was, any woman who did it, it was a total disaster. And so, what really kept women monogamous was fear. They would lose everything if they were unfaithful to their husbands. It wasn't, and guys actually managed to talk themselves into believing that women were naturally monogamous. It's not true. Women are the literature of all times and places is unanimous that what women are by nature is fickle, and to make them monogamous, you have to have the incentives in place created by Christian marriage with father custody and
They need
yeah.
patriarchy to keep
Yeah,
them sane.
patriarchy. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Patriarchy is what keeps women monogamous.
So when feminists condemn the patriarchy for keeping women under control, they are essentially correct, but it's necessary.
That's what civilization is based on.
Yeah,
Yes.
and so I mean, even like conservative men will today they've internalized, or they deny the fact that women need to control men. When well,
Right, right, right.
well,
Yeah. They,
no. When you think about it, wait a second. Well, bottom line is look at those figures with divorce. When it comes to commitment, it's the fairer sex that has a bigger problem with commitment.
Yes, obviously. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
Um,
Yeah, the way it's supposed to work is that, the man presses the woman for sex, the woman presses back for commitment, and ideally, in the marriage, the man gets sex and the woman gets commitment, but two other things happen that maybe were not looked for. Namely, the woman finds that she actually enjoys sexual relations with her husband, and more importantly, the man gets commitment from the woman.
yeah.
And that is what has disappeared completely.
Commit. Yep. Yep. Yep.
It's
And
really
again,
it's really supposed to be, the sex and the commitment are supposed to go both
yeah.
ways. That's the natural way.
And sexual satisfaction comes with needing the man, feeling that she needs the man, needs to look up to him, rely upon him. That's going to ignite that hypergamous nature, which
Yes,
in a healthy
right. Yes.
environment is what you want. Just a,
Yes, yes.
yeah.
Even an ordinary husband will be, in a patriarchal environment, an ordinary husband will be attractive to his wife. She
Like when
will
he gets up and finds,
respect him, and yeah.
checks out what the noise is at night or something.
Yes, yes, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
This is something. Well, so then one of those solutions is not only changing the laws, but changing customs and habits, and that is the um, the reassertion of male authority and hierarchy over women. And
Over women, that's right. Yeah, and if you want to read more on this, read Stephen Baskerville. He's one of the best
yeah, I
people
interviewed him. Yeah,
writing today on this subject.
you have to
Uh,
revert. And it's just that when that earlier comment, I don't want to reverse the gains made by women. Well, you have to. Those gains have been
yes,
made at the expense of men and society.
those gains are yeah, they're really
Yeah,
losses. The
yeah,
women are not happy. There hasn't been any. They call it the paradox of female happiness, because all the survey results show that since feminism rose, women have been getting more and more unhappy, and academics call it a paradox. It's not a paradox. The progress women have made is precisely progress toward unhappiness.
well, that's I think a mature person acknowledges that the happiness isn't really a goal. It's a episodic feeling we have. What we really want is fulfillment and purpose in life, and you
Yeah,
only get that through sacrifice and service.
good
That's
good life well lived. Which, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's much more a matter of accomplishing something like raising a family than it is.
Not every
Be,
day being happy, like you're drunk all the time or something.
right, right,
You
right,
know,
right.
I'm happy. No, 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 no.
No, no. I'm
That's
thinking. I'm thinking of happy. See, my background is in philosophy, and I'm thinking when I speak of happiness, I speak of what Aristotle called eudaimonia, which is like flourishing in life. A success in life. That's happiness in that sense, not happiness in the sense of a passing mood.
yeah. And so I guess to wrap it all up, again, it's what we need to do is just uh, reestablish male authority,
Yes, exactly,
and
exactly.
everything will fall back into play. It's a choice. It's a common trope or education of women, like Title X, right? And
Yeah.
we need to advance women's education. And a society can push education, but any society that pushes education and economic or professional advancement for women is eventually going to have a demographic crisis,
Yes, exactly.
and that's just stupid and
Yes.
evil
Yeah.
because ultimately you got to deal with the basics before if you're not reproducing, society goes away and
Nothing else is going to matter.
nothing else is going to matter. Exactly.
Future belongs to those who show up.
Yeah,
So
future belongs to the fertile.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, our people have to show up.
Okay.
Well,
Well.
yeah. Perhaps in conclusion,
Yeah.
I ought to mention that I'm still writing for Countercurrents. I just published an article on dating, marriage, and sex in the 1950s. It's the first part of a five-part history of the sexual revolution, as I see it. And anybody who likes the kind of issues that we've been talking about this hour, be looking there, because the second one's going to go up this week about the actual sexual revolution that occurred on college campuses in the 1960s, when the girls decided to go ahead and play house with their boyfriends. It was, kind of the beginning of
Well.
all the trouble. There's
Once
going to be an
again,
essay on the 70s, on the 80s and 90s, my whole interpretation of the sexual revolution. It'll be appearing in Countercurrents over
excellent.
the next few weeks.
And again, what you had here was sort of a breakdown of, well, basically the men who were supposed to control, they sort of cracked. They didn't hold the line.
Yes, that's
Right?
right. Yeah, yeah,
It's like
that's
Adam.
right.
giving into Eve at the beginning.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yes, yes. There are people who've known about this problem for a long time, aren't there? Yeah,
Yeah, I always thought it'd be the happy wives, happy lives thing,
yeah,
and just
right,
have that and have underneath it have Adam and Eve.
right, right, right.
So, yeah, that's the breakdown of the 60s, the universities, co-ed, and all that stuff. And it's interesting because the college campus provided what was called a mass situation, what Wilhelm Reich wrote about,
Hmm.
where you could same with the rock festivals, the music, the temple, the arrow, and everything with media. And you could break down the inhibitions, particularly inhibitions of the women. And once that happens, they give in to sexual liberation. Their whole mood and attitude changes, you know, and
Yeah,
things just fall apart from there. So
that's
women
my
leave
next.
their looms, right?
Uh, that's my next essay. It's called "Ground Zero of the Sexual Revolution." It's about the campus sexual experimentation of the late '60s. I hope you'll check it out.
Excellent. Well, listen, Roger, thank you for coming on the show.
I've enjoyed it.
I'll let you go, and I'll post this soon. I'll send you the link.
And I think eventually these essays that I've been writing this year will be incorporated into an expanded second edition of Sexual Utopia and Power. We'll probably, I hope to be able to put that together before the end of this calendar year. We'll see.
Well, yeah, just hold the fair sex accountable
Yes.
if they
Good
want to be
talking to
equal.
you. Yes.
So,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
All right. Bye bye.
Good night. Bye bye.